our two esteemed speakers, Dr. Rauda and Prof. Quinn. And that will be followed by the Q&A session that I had mentioned earlier. We will wrap up today's session with a thank you note and a feedback session. Right? So without further delay, I would like to invite our program director, Miss Per, to give her welcome note. Miss Per, please.
Hello, can you hear me? Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking time to join us today. I'm so glad that you are interested in the topic of bilingualism. Bilingualism is an integral part of our national identity, and language plays a vital role in shaping our children's cognitive skills, cultural understanding, and perhaps even future opportunities. I hope today's session will be insightful and meaningful for you as we explore effective ways of raising bilingual kids at home. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the two speakers as well for agreeing to lead this session despite their busy schedules. Thank you, Prof. Queen and Dr. Rauda. Without further ado, I shall pass the time back to the host to kickstart the session. Dave, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miss Per. That was such a warm welcome, and I think we are all ready, and we've come to the point where we have all been waiting for. So our first speaker for today is Dr. Rauda. She is the Senior Curriculum Specialist from National Institute of Early Childhood Development. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Rauda to share her expert knowledge and experience. Dr. Rauda, please.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, let me share my slides first.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Rauda.
Good morning, everyone. How are you today? Okay, first of all, I want to say thank you because you're spending your precious Saturday morning to join us in this webinar. Okay, let me share with you that the topic today, the best way to raise bilingual kids. You know, when I got this topic, it just brought me back to the days when I was a young parent. Okay, now my children are in their 20s. Okay, so that was like a long time ago. But I could recall, that thinking and that that I would say maybe a bit of anxiety whether I'm doing the best for my child because I want the best. As parents, I'm sure we want the best for our children. So just that I'm just sharing this this thing that this topic is personal to me in a way because it brought back the memories of me as a young parent back then. Okay, so let's proceed. Now, what do we mean by bilingual? I don't mean the dictionary definition, but it's in the real world context. Okay, so let's say bilingual is about two. Bi is two, right? Two lingual. Bilingual means two languages. Okay, let's say it's language A and language B. Okay, so we have like a spectrum or a range. Okay, so at one end, when a person understands a language A, okay, for example, and can respond and can speak in language A. But for language B, the person can understand language B, but cannot yet respond well because of probably limited vocabulary and all that. We have that, and that is still a bilingual. That is, we can still call the person bilingual, but it's at that end of spectrum, right? So then with learning and practice, okay, then the person can move on to another part of bilingual where for language A, the person can understand and can speak language A. And for language B, the person can understand and can respond somewhat in language B, but the person is dominant in one of the languages. In Singapore context, it's usually the English language, right? But we can still respond, but probably it's just more comfortable. For example, when we text, it's more comfortable in texting in English, or when we speak and respond, we are more comfortable in English. That means we are dominant in that language. Then, with learning and practice, the person can move along the spectrum to the other end, where the person is just as fluent, that means very fluent, very confident in both languages. That means you can speak and communicate in both languages, whether in personal setting or in formal setting. Okay, so a person can move within that spectrum with learning and practice and exposure. Can a person, go back or slide back into being dominant into in one language? Yes, because if there's lack of exposure, it's the thing that if you don't use it, you lose it. So it's that way of languages also. So you may slide back to somewhere, where you're not very, not as fluent in both languages, not equally fluent in both languages. So this is the meaning of bilingual in contextual meaning of bilingual, okay, in real life. Okay, now let's go on. So we talk about the best way, right? Before we know or we want to know the best way, we need to first understand why we need to start from early childhood stage. The importance of it. Why? What are the advantages or the importance of learning languages, and why do you want to start as early as possible? Now, if you haven't started your child in the early childhood stage, it's okay. It's never too late. Start today, okay? All right. Then we also need to learn the process of language learning so that we can better support the child. And the most important part, you can see it's in red, right? So what should we do? We want tips, okay? Practical tips. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about the brain first, okay? Brain size growth. So at birth, okay, the child's or the newborn's brain is about 25% of the adult's brain. At 2 years old, you can see the spurt, right? Within 2 years is 70% of the adult's brain. And in 6 years is 90% of the adult's brain. First, we talk about the physical size, right? But it is not just that spurt, that growth spurt is not just about the size. It's also the complexity of the brain that goes together with that growth, that physical growth. So now that I'm sharing this information, I don't know if this is the first time you've heard of it or you know about it before. But when I was sharing it, I was just thinking, how would parents respond to this information sharing if it's the first time that they are hearing it? Could it be that that they realize, hey, the early years is very important in giving that positive learning experiences to children? Or I was also thinking that, is it possible that the response could be if the parent has a child who's like below 6 years old? Oh my, this is like a very intensive growth for my child. I must really make use of it before it's too late. So these 6 years, I really must cram everything into the child's brain. Like you squeeze everything into a bag kind of thing. So you put in so much information, you just, but this hot housing, let me caution you, will be detrimental to the child. So this is not the intention to show that growth spurt. It's not for you to start to think, okay, now I need to hothouse my child. I need to like cram everything. No, the support for that would have to be developmentally appropriate for that child. Okay, it's not about cramming knowledge and skills during this period. Okay, we will talk more about it. Why is it going to be harmful? It may be harmful to the child to have that kind of practice. Okay, on the other hand, if I have a parent audience, I'm not sure, okay? If you have a child who's beyond 6 years, then if this is the first time you're looking at this information, say, oh my, what have I done? I missed that growth spurt. And now, what have I done? It's too late for my child. It's never too late to learn, okay? Learning doesn't stop at 6 years old, all right? The child can still learn. beyond 6 years old. Okay, so don't panic if you have your children are above 6 years old. I can share my personal experience. Okay, when my family and I relocated to Canada, my children were about 7 to 8 plus. And when we relocated to Canada, the schools there, right, to enroll schools there, the two languages that they have is English and French. That means my children will be learning French in school, right? So they started learning after that 6 years, right? Let me share with you because I told you they are already in their 20s. So they did learn French, and at one part they were in French immersion schools actually, and then throughout their elementary, middle school, and then high school. So it's possible to learn even though you've missed that 6 years. It's just that we have to use different strategies, which I will share later on. Okay, let's talk a bit. I'm not going to go into the depth of of the brain or the neurons and all that, but just a little bit of it is that when the child has this positive experiences, okay, it will strengthen that synaptic connection, which means that if the synaptic connections are strong, okay, then it will create that networking in the brain, okay, the brain, such that information can be processed faster. That's why sometimes at a certain age, you will see that some children, not just sometimes because of their developmental milestone, but it could also be the nurturing, that you can see that, some children can pick up very fast, okay? So, but the main thing here, the message that I want to convey is that if we want the children to learn something, start early. You don't have to start intensively, but start early. Okay. All right. Let's move on. Advantages of learning languages during early childhood, and then also beyond early childhood, I will also extend why is it that we need to learn languages, not just early childhood, but these are some of the advantages that when we start early. Okay. Learning languages is more efficient during early childhood. Okay. Firstly, the adult's brain will need more stimulation than children to achieve the same results. So that means at a later stage, it's not that we cannot learn. Okay, we can all still learn new languages. It's just that usually compared to the child, in order for us to achieve that automation stage, okay, that fluency stage, we need more stimulation. We need more practice. We need more exposure than children. Okay, so if it's at the later stage, that's why it's better to start early. But if you haven't started early, it's never too late. We can always start. Okay. Now, the other thing is about learning languages. Okay, we talk about learning at least more than learning language itself will help with the development of executive function skills for the brain. Okay. But if you learn more than one language, it will enhance that development. Okay, so I'm going to share how it will enhance the development. Let's talk about three of it. Okay. The working memory, cognitive flexibility, and inhibitory control. Okay, so what is it first? Okay, working memory. Working memory is like short-term memory, okay, where it enables a person to complete some task. Okay, I'll give an example at a preschool setting, okay, because I'm from early childhood background, right? So preschool setting, let's say we tell the child a few things, a few instructions. Okay, after you're done with your artwork, put it at this table, go to the sink, wash your hands, take the paper towel, wipe your hands, and then go to the learning corner and take a book and read quietly. Okay, so some instructions, right? Okay, so in order for the child to complete this, right, they have to remember all these things, right? Some children, they can remember. You tell them what to do and then they can remember, they can do it. Some children, okay, they can remember perhaps the first two. Maybe after they put at the table, they wash their hands and then they start running around or doing something. So sometimes when we tell children instructions, that's a few instructions at one go, and they don't do it, it's not that because they're testing our patience, okay? Because sometimes it's because of their working memory. Okay, so let's talk about how learning of languages, if we have more than one language, will enhance this. Remember that each language has its own vocabulary, right? So when we expose the child to the different vocabulary, this will enhance the child's working memory, the development of the working memory. Okay, next, cognitive flexibility. What is cognitive flexibility? Is the ability to switch from one task to another. Okay. For adults, sometimes we do it without being conscious about it, right? Okay. For children, sometimes this is an example of how they exercise cognitive flexibility or the lack of it. Let's say they have an outdoor time. During outdoor, right, the children will be like, loud. They can use the outdoor voice. We call it the outdoor voice. You can you use that, and then you can run about and all that, right? And then when they come in, okay, for a certain activity, indoor activity, and that's more like, table, working on crafts or something. If they have this cognitive flexibility, they're able to switch over to a quieter mode, lower voice kind of thing. But for some children, you still see them like as active as ever, like how they were outside. That means they were not able to like switch that easily. So like how, as preschool educators, we would understand that it is not about the child trying to test our patience, but rather is the child's ability to switch. Because what was the previous activity? You can see that remnants of it, right? So it's that cognitive flexibility part. Now, how does learning at least like two languages, right? Being bilingual help in this cognitive flexibility. Now, at the early stage of when the child is learning two languages, you would see that the child might mix the sentence in, the two languages parts in that within one sentence. Okay, so they're still developing it, even though you're not seeing it, they're developing that cognitive flexibility. Okay. And then when they come to that fluent stage, okay, then you will be able to see how they're able to seamlessly, they will just switch from one language to another. For example, when they talk to their Laoshi, automatically it will come out Chinese. Or when they talk to their English teacher, it will, the words will be in English. So that ability to just switch over will be more apparent as they gain more fluency. But when they're younger, you can see that mixing and all that is just part of the learning process to reach that stage. But rest assured that, this will contribute or enhance in their development of the cognitive flexibility. Okay, let's talk about inhibitory control. Do you remember there's this thing, it was quite some time ago, I think it was in TikTok or something, that, when children were asked to not eat something, wait until mommy comes back, then you can eat it, whether it's like chocolate or marshmallow or whatever in front, and then, when the child is able to stop himself from eating that is the child executing that inhibitory control. If the child is not able to do that, it doesn't mean that the child's being naughty, okay? It probably means that the child has not developed that part yet, that skill yet. So then, how would learning languages contribute or enhance that development? Again, we see when they're at the early stage, they still, you can use these languages, or sometimes they speak English to the Laoshi, or they speak Chinese to the English teacher, or the mother tongue teacher, they speak English, or maybe they mix in one sentence, that because they're still learning, okay? But when they have come to the fluency stage, okay, there is this part that you don't see it. They might not even be conscious, even for bilinguals, if we have bilinguals, so we don't really realize this happening in our brain, that this brain, as we are talking, for example, when I'm talking in English here, there's this part of inhibitory control that controls my brain that I'm not delivering it in half English and half Malay, for example. So there is this part. So this is not seen, but it is internal, the internal working of the brain, okay? Okay, so that's the part, okay, to show the importance. So this part is not just about early childhood. Even as you we acquire languages even in, if your child is beyond early childhood, it's primary school, during primary school and all that, it still enhances that development of the executive function skills of our brain. Okay. So next, learning languages provides foundation for learning of other languages, even at a later stage. Okay. Other than, of course, all this research findings and all that, I think I'll just share, my personal experience of this. Okay. So when, remember when we relocated to Canada, my children were learning French, right? So I also enrolled myself in this adult class of learning French. I think you know that learning at an adult stage is can be quite challenging. Okay. But I realized then when I was learning French, right? My brain tend to relate to Malay sentence structure, because it's similar. Because Malay sentence structure and English sentence structures are different. So it tends to relate. I was only conscious about it, but like when I started to think about it, hey, why am I like thinking about Malay language when I'm like, doing this? So basically what happens is that for each language, it has its own structure, its own phonics and all that, right? And this would provide that foundation for you to learn the other language, even if it's not a direct relation, but it provides that brain structure of learning languages. It could also be in terms of the phonics, the pronunciation, because I remember my my child's teacher said, hey, your child can pronounce the French R very well. This is quite surprising. She just learned French. Then I realized that what she meant by that was that French R is not like the English R or the Malay R. It's similar to the Arabic letter. Because my children are exposed to 3 languages from young, English, Malay, and Arabic. So then I realized, hey, that actually helps her in that acquisition of her French later on. Okay. So let's look at this. Why I'm sharing this, some of the research findings about positive effects of early exposure to language, and also when children are exposed to 2 languages at a very young age, probably from birth. Prof. Quinn will share more about the details about the research findings and all that. So I will not go into that. But basically what I'm trying to summarize here is that this early exposure to language or languages will have positive effects for our children. Okay, so some of the questions that I get asked is that, there's this thing whether should I start with one language first, okay, and then when the child can start speaking that language, then I introduce another language, right? So it builds up. Remember, one language will build the foundation and for another language, because the brain will build that structure, even though it's totally different structures, but it helps, okay? And they will build. So that, okay? With that, now, let me share with you this experience. When I was in Canada, they seem to use a lot of this for the those non-English speaking families. So what they do, they will use their native language or their mother tongue at home when the child is still young and the child hasn't gone to school yet. So it could be, it could be Urdu or Vietnamese language or Chinese or Arabic. So that's what when I did my research there and I talked to the mothers there, okay, so the different mothers. And when the child is fluent there, okay, and then when they go to school, it's about 3+ that they start their formal schooling there, to 3+ to 4. And then they acquire the English language. So when I was doing my research, I was interviewing the children also. By that age, about 5 to 6, they're already very fluent in English. Of course, I couldn't talk to them in their native language, but I'm sure they are fluent in their native language because, it starts from birth, right? If you want to choose this method, then what I would suggest is that if you choose to start with one language first and then builds on with this next language, that first language has to be the mother tongue language. Why? Because English is dominant. If it's in Singapore context, it's dominant, right? If you start with English and you want to start with mother tongue later on, it's harder because the exposure will be much, much more outside. So you want to start with something that's not easily, is not dominant in the environment that the child is living in. Okay, the next one, another way is also the exposure of both languages at once. That means from birth, you're already exposing the child to both languages. As research has shown, the baby is able to pick up the nuances of the two languages, even at the very young age. Okay, even when they are not able to speak yet, because it was through eye contact that they did this research. You can use either way, because I shared with you that I've seen that how that one language first was utilized, and it seems I've interviewed quite a number of children that, and they use that's the dominant way of using or nurturing language there. That's what I noticed. But for me, I use the second one, where I expose my children to all three languages, right from the start. Okay. All right. So next. Oh, before that, I want to share something. For parents these days, right? You have it's all you need to do is just copy this title and then put in Google. You will get a lot of strategies, a lot of tips, a lot of advice. Okay. So I think that the issue is we are overwhelmed with a lot of things, and it's not possible to do it all, right? So what I'm going to share here will be just 2 tips. Okay, 2 tips for you. Okay. Because I think at the end of the day, we want to know what works, right? So, tip number 1, consistent commitment and involvement. That means if you want to nurture mother tongue and you want your child to be effectively bilingual, it has to be a commitment. You have to have a plan, and this plan must be done consistently. And the plan is not that I will send to the best preschool, I'll get the best tutor, and that's my commitment. No, there's this part on involvement. That means we have to be involved as parents. Whether, so there are certain strategies that we have to be involved in the child's learning as well. Okay, because remember, learning starts from home. Okay, so it is not about outsourcing. Okay, so you can see the one that I highlight, the one in bold, right? You can use this strategy, which probably you've heard before, allocating a specific person, one parent, one language, or one person, one language. Okay, it's possible if that works in your family, because not all families can have that arrangement. If you want to use that strategy, then my suggestion is the mother tongue language has to be assigned to the parent or the person that spends the most time with the child. Okay, I repeat, it must be with the person who spends the most time with the child, because the child will be exposed to the English language outside a lot. So we must have that maximum exposure at home. Okay, if you choose to do this strategy, or okay, it doesn't work out with my family. Probably, the father is or the mother is overseas, or probably a single parent family, or things like that, right? So it doesn't work out. So it could be you allocate a day or time. Okay, if one day is not possible, even a time for an enjoyable activity that will promote or that is linked to that mother tongue language. It has to be enjoyable. Why? Okay, I'll give an example. If let's say let's say someone who likes to go to a spa, right? You like to go to spa. Why? Because you will associate that spa experience with feeling of happiness, feeling of joy, enjoy, right? So that's the same that we want to create. We want the child to be able to relate that language with a feeling of enjoyment, a feeling of happiness. So it has to be, that activity has to be something that the child will enjoy doing with the parent. It could be just play, but play in the mother tongue language. Okay, so maybe even playing with colors, or painting, or even throwing balls, throw, catch, but in mother tongue language. Why I keep saying it has to be in mother tongue language, that the commitment must be more because the child be exposed to the English language more in the external outside home setting. Okay. So next, bridging home and school experiences. This would be, I would say, more relevant to the preschool setting because then we need to be more involved in what's happening in school. What are the songs that they learn? Then you can play the same songs or sing the same songs with the children, so that they can, they can see that link between home and school learning experiences, and this will help to make the learning better for the children. Okay. So the other part, parents' attitude and perception towards the language, that affects the child's motivation. For example, I cannot teach, for example, if I say, I cannot speak to my child in Malay because my Malay is not good. So, but it's important for my child to learn. So the attitude or the perception is that it's important for my child to learn. It's important for my child to know the language. Then what about the parent, right? Is it important for the parent to speak? The thing is that children are always taking parents or the people, adults around them as role models. So, and the first one will be the parents, of course, right? So whether they articulate it or they don't articulate it, they will see that you're not using the language. If you're not using the language, then is it important? The most important people in my life are not using the language. So why would the language be important, right? So in terms of involvement, okay, if we are not there, like we need to learn so that we can support the child better. It is not about outsourcing. Okay, even if, let's say, the other parent can speak the language, we need to also learn to show that we want to learn together with the child. Yes, learning a new language, if you're brushing up, is different. If it's like learning a new language is tough. When I was learning French, right, I remember I was sitting in the kitchen trying to say out the words, and then my small, my daughter came in, she was still small, and she corrected my pronunciation. So I tried again, and she corrected it again, and then I tried again, and they went around like 5 times, and then she said, "Never mind, mommy." I think she was like, okay, this is where she can go. But with that, whatever, little knowledge I have of French, at least I could support her when she did her show and tell, and I could hear and understand what she was, when she was practicing at home and all that. Okay, and I showed that it is important to learn. Next, focus on the person, not skills. Holistic development of a child. If you look at the picture, right, the seeds. Okay, we want this seed to grow into a strong, fruit-bearing tree. Okay, it's not going to happen overnight, right? We need to have patience. Similarly, with our children, if we want them to acquire languages, we need to have patience. It will take time. Okay, but we need to ensure that we are consistent in our nurturing, in our support, in our involvement, in our commitment. Now, if I'm impatient with this seed and I plant this seed and I want this seed to grow quickly, so fertilizer is good, for plants, right? So I take 1 kilo of fertilizer and dump it on the seed. Here, take lots of nutrients so it can grow faster. What's going to happen? I think that seed might not survive, right? Similarly, if we this is where I was talking about earlier about hot housing the child, or we overcram is not developmentally appropriate, right? It will be counterproductive. In fact, it may be more, it may have negative effects on the child and the child's perception towards the language, or, lack of motivation towards that language. So we need to manage our expectations, okay? Because, and we cannot compare even within siblings, that whether at 3 years old, my first can do this, but my second cannot, because each child has his or her own developmental trajectory. As long as we keep on nurturing, they will make progress, okay? And ensure, again, your child's learning experiences are fun, because that will affect the motivation. Once they dislike it, to do that, that damage control or that repair work, it's harder, because once they dislike the language, they really put off by it, because it involves the emotional state, which comes on to the third point: focus on holistic development especially social and emotional development. Even at preschools level, we are focusing a lot on this social and emotional development because it provides a foundation. If the child has that, self-efficacy that I can learn, if the child has that confidence that I can learn this language or I can learn both languages, then it will make that learning easier for the child and the child is more motivated to learn. So that is the focus of it. How do we want to make the child confident in that language? How do we want to focus so that it's okay to make mistakes? We're not always correcting the child all the time, when they are speaking, in another language that we ask them to speak, things like that. So these are the things that, will contribute to us nurturing the child's acquisition of languages. You see the caution over there? Parents may pass stress and worry to the child. If you over worry and all that, right? The child can pick it up. And that will not have a good effect or a positive effect on the child's learning experiences. So we need to manage our expectations, manage our emotions. Okay. So to conclude, the best way to support your child's learning and development, okay, to become bilingual children, is to appreciate the unique and special person that your child is. Remember, your child has his or her own developmental trajectory, and to create happy, meaningful childhood for your child. With that, I thank you.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Rauda, for that very enriching sharing. Thanks for sharing your expert knowledge on information, especially how information is being processed at the developmental stage. And very interestingly, you pointed out how being bilingual actually help with the cognitive development of a child. And I think mostly what came out very prominently from your presentation was that to be effective in a language, there's three important things: learning, practice, and exposure. So you can't just learn a language and leave it at there, but the practice comes together with it. And most importantly, it's the exposure. So I'm sure parents out there have taken this they've taken a lot of notes from you, and I hope they will be very mindful about the exposure that they are going to give the child so that he or she can be effectively bilingual. So thank you once again for that lovely sharing. Next, we have our second speaker. She's Prof. Yao Wei Quinn. She's the head of Cluster Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences, Professor of Psychology, Singapore University of Technology and Design. You can see that she's a very busy person, and we are so thankful that she has taken time and effort to be here today. So out to you, Prof. Quinn. I hope you're already there. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Let me share my slides. Okay, great. Good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me here today to share some of my knowledge and insights and also experience. And thank you so much also for Dr. Rauda for her very passionate and insightful sharing. So let me first start presentation, my sharing with this very important thing about babies are citizens of the world, which means that you don't see babies not motivated to learn a or any language. So if you decided to move to Hungary today, with a young baby, your baby will grow up being a very good native speaker of a Hungarian. So and young children are motivated to speak the language they are immersed in. And of course, one quick question is, can my child pick up 2 or more languages? Of course, the answer is absolutely. So let me share a little bit more about that. So why do babies learn language? Why are they motivated? Because we are naturally wired for social interaction and communication. So children are driven by curiosity and the need to engage with their surroundings. It's hardly you can see a child that is not motivated to play. And they like to explore the environment. They're very curious. They want to interact with other people. And this social motivation, we said, combined with the brain's innate ability to learn language, allows children to acquire language efficiently. So there's this interesting thing I wanted to share with you is on the sensitive period in language learning. So at birth, we are wired to learn language. So infant brain can perceive, for example, the full set of 800 or so sounds called phonemes. So phonemes are the smallest unit of sounds that make some meaning. So for example, PAT is pet, BAT is bat. So P and B, whether you put a P or B, actually it changes the meaning of the word totally. So P and B itself is called a phoneme. And so there are many, many phonemes that exist in the human world across different languages. So we are wired to perceive all this full set of phonemes, and this requires the brain to detect subtle differences in spoken language. So this is what we meant by we are all equipped to learn any language. And sometime around 6 to 9 months, most of the babies are open to learn sounds of the native tongue. Usually begins around 6 months, where they start to understand and distinguish vowels, and then 9 months for consonants. And really, they can discriminate all sounds of all languages. This sensitive period usually lasts a few months, but it can be extended for children exposed to sounds of a second language. So this, I wanted to highlight that this is about perception of sounds. So we are born with the ability to distinguish sounds of every language. And around 9 months, they start to tune into the specific sounds of the language to hear. And they may lose sensitivity to sounds not used in their language. So this is in line with what Dr. Rauda mentioned about the pruning. So we know that actually babies, when they are born, there are a lot of synapses. They have a lot more gray matter synapses than they have, in compared to older people. And when we grow older, we start to be more efficient. And when we start to be more efficient, we have to drop out some of the synapses that we are equipped with when we were born. So that's where we start to lose the sounds of other languages that we are not exposed to. So sometime around 12 months or so, they gain expertise in the language they're exposed to, and they may start to lose the ability to discriminate sounds between two languages unless the child is continually exposed to multiple languages. So there are a lot of studies out there that actually shows that babies start to lose this ability to distinguish if they are not continually exposed to those languages. So give an example. So in Japanese, Japanese baby who hears sounds from English learns to distinguish R and L in the way we are used, in US, in UK, even in Singapore. Because in English, R and L mean very different things. So when you say rice, R-I-C-E, versus you say lies, L-I-C-E, they are quite different. They're very different meaning. So it's very important in English to distinguish R and L. But in Japanese, R and L actually is not that distinguishable. They usually had it in the middle. So the Japanese baby, if they stop hearing sounds from English, for example, after 1 year old, they might no longer be able to distinguish R and L when they get older. So this is what we meant by losing the ability to discriminate. So as long as you're continually exposed to two languages, you can actually continue to able to hear and discriminate speech sounds from the various languages. So up to age 7, children can usually pick up a second language with a fair degree of fluency. And as they get older, as Dr. Rhoda has also mentioned, it's not that they cannot learn a new language, just that it get a little bit harder as they get older, because you already form some representations in the memory when you're exposed to the language early on. So if you continue to get exposed to two languages, continue to be able to use it, you can continue to maintain and develop the second language at a fair degree. That said, it doesn't mean that you cannot learn a new language, let's say from 8 years old, 10 years old, and even more. A lot of the times, it depends a lot of your motivation on the context you're in. So if you move to a new country totally, at 8 years old, 10 years old, or even 12 years old, you can still pick up, just that you might not be able to achieve native-like proficiency, which means that you may not able to speak. For example, let's say you have not exposed to Chinese for young, and then you moved to China, for example, at 12 years old, and start exposing to Chinese. It doesn't mean that you cannot learn Chinese, just that you may not be able to speak as well as a native Chinese speaker. And there are some other language-specific rules that you may not be able to pick up. For example, English is actually a very morphology-rich language, which means that whether you change was, is, he, she, is quite rich. So if the grammatical rules are pretty complex, and also in English, there's a lot of things we call the irregular verbs and irregular tense. So you have to learn them. So if you only pick up English, let's say past 12 years old, there are things that you're very hard to pick up, and you can still speak and communicate. You can still communicate fluently, but there are certain things that you might not able to. There must be some errors that you may still commit because you weren't exposed early. So that's what it means in terms of language development. So just give you some insights into what happens when we learn a language. That gives you an idea of why it can be difficult as you get older. First, infants actually use statistical cues to find word boundaries. They recognize sounds through some mental computation. And they learn to recognize words where one word ends and the next one begins. So this is what we call like a statistical learning. So for example, we hear a lot of words called pretty baby, pretty baby. And you go, okay, pretty lady, or pretty man, or pretty, and then you say baby, cute baby, happy baby. So this means is that as you hear more and more, the likelihood of pretty that comes together as a word is much more highly likely than, TB, right? Pretty baby. So the in between is less likely, and baby appears a lot more frequently. So as you hear more and more, you realize that the probability of pretty coming together is a lot more higher than TB, right? Or baby, right? A baby is much more higher than TB. So that's where babies start to learn. That's what also means that exposure is important, because the more they hear, the stronger they build this statistical relationship. And of course, intense social emotion is very important, besides just technical understanding sounds. So learning the infant brain requires human interaction. So this is what we call the social gating. So there's a social function of language. It gets children to pay attention to people. And children and infants learn better in the presence of others. So there are research studies that shows that if you get a baby, to learn from a TV, okay, versus a child that learns from in-person interaction, of course, the in-person interaction is much more better, and they learn better than if you just learn from the TV. So that is what it means, because when you're in person, you pay a lot of attention to the face, to the tone, to the gesture, and to the context that you're going to use. And you want to build a relationship with that interlocutor. So that is some of the two very important foundations of language learning. And as we grow older, the ability to pick up statistical cues are getting less intuitive. And also, when we get older, when we learn a new language, because you relearn a new language, the process of learning a second new language goes through a lot of semantic representations that build on the first one. So the whole process of learning is a little bit different. But again, it doesn't mean that it cannot, but the process of learning a language is a little bit different. So therefore, children are really highly responsive to social interaction, eye contact, and the caregiver speech, which further reinforces language development. So one important take-home message is that early and consistent exposure through social interaction is important as a key to strong language development in babies. Okay, so let me go on. Important to mention about language maintenance. What does language maintenance means? It means that it means it's a continuing use of a language in the face of a competition from a regionally or socially more powerful language. How do you maintain a language that you have learned? The assumption some of us thought is maybe once you acquired a certain linguistic knowledge, you'll be on the way to eventual fully fluent bilingualism in adulthood. But actually, this is not exactly true. So Dr. Rauda also mentioned that, there are many ways of being a big bilingual children, and it's like a slider where you can slide from more proficient to less proficient, and that's what we call that bilingualism exists on a continuum. So it is not about whether you are bilingual or not, but it's really about how much, when, and in what context that you are bilingual. So young children have sophisticated language learning capacities, but the ability to understand and speak a language can go away. It could be completely go away if they uprooted from a place that had that language exposure to another place that have zero exposure to the language, or it can go away partially when optimal input conditions are not available beyond infancy. So this is what we call the recessivism of, for example, mother tongue to English, and it's usually due to prestige, social status, attitude, and degrees of acculturation. So a lot of the parents here have children who are young, but importantly, there are also parents who say, "Hey, how come my children start to stop speaking mother tongue okay after they go into primary school?" There are a lot of reasons, but that is a recessivism. So maybe the exposure or the ability to converse in the mother tongue was a lot higher, and then it tend to decrease. So this language maintenance issue is actually quite important. So what helps to slow down this recessivism of mother tongue? So one is exposure, we mentioned. Exposure is crucial for developing fluency, pronunciation, and automatic language processing. So frequent exposure reinforces the neural pathways. For example, you stop the brain from pruning in a way to stop that synapses from losing the synapses, the losing the connections, and it expands vocabulary. So it's like a muscle. So the more you exercise, the better you get, and also increases your grammar intuition, and it slows down the language attrition or prevents language attrition. But if you have limited exposure, it leads to slower processing and reliant stronger on translation, and you have weaker retention over time. So amount of exposure matters regardless at what stage you are. So we don't want to think that, okay, my baby is very good now, has a lot of exposure in mother tongue, and she seems to be fine in primary school, and then I'll let it run. I'll be fine. I'm not going to think too much. She'll be fine. But I think sometimes language do retreat to less used, and so therefore you might lose the ability or the confidence in speaking the language as you get older. And the richness of exposure matters. Okay, so the quality of input, it refers to the type of language exposure, the richness and the variety of the language and input sources. So this means that if you have a greater variety of interlocutors and contexts for using the mother tongue, it does help to reduce attrition, and it helps to reinforce the language maintenance. So there's a diverse of activities or domains that you can actually enhance this exposure, richness of exposure. So of course, there's a diverse of cognitive, exposure. There's social. So if you, for example, expose not only let's say mother tongue at home, but if you go out of the house, if you go to museum, if you go to playground, if you engage mother tongue, that actually expands that richness, because the words that you speak at home are quite different compared to the words that you speak when you're at the playground. And also the kind of words that you speak in the library or the museum are also different. And also the language, the words, the vocabulary that you use when you go out for gathering that you speak are also different. So therefore, the variety of exposure is important for that cognitive and social, and also emotional engagement. So earlier, Dr. Rauda also mentioned that this emotional engagement is very important. They have to be fun. And so when you are emotionally engaged, you actually remember better. So actually, memory, you can enhance memory by linking an emotional saliency of the event or the word or the context. You actually remember better if you feel better. Even if you traumatized, you can also remember. That's also one reason why some people don't like a certain language, because they might have some bad experience, associating with the language learning of that particular language. So emotional engagement is also very important. So there's an important period in language attrition that we know that actually our studies actually have shown that around the age of 9 to 12 is actually an important period during which reduced mother tongue input can lead to higher mother tongue attrition. So there's many reasons. One reason is the neurological factors. So there's a normal decline in neuroplasticity after puberty, and there's more pruning, less flexibility, less plasticity, which contributes to the increased difficulty in maintaining and acquiring languages. So this is very common, it's very normal for adults, for people, for human beings to go through this development phase. And so making this 9 to 12 age range particularly sensitive to changes in language exposure. Now, of course, beyond the age of 12, there's also what we call the turbulent years, the age 13 to 18, where during this age, they are also at risk of losing the mother tongue if they are not actively maintained. At this age, socialization is very important. Friends are very important. So if their friends start to not speak Mandarin, then they were obviously not going to speak Mandarin because they have to be part of the group. And also, if you realize that in curriculum, when they reach secondary school, in primary school, a mother tongue consists of one quarter, right, of the curriculum, at least. And then when you go to secondary school, it's probably 1/8 of the curriculum. And so you can see that the language dominance in English is much stronger at that age. So factors such as diminished exposure and social integration into this English dominant environment contribute to this attrition. So perhaps one of the tips which I'm going to go through a little bit now that I'm here at the moment is that if you're able to find your child a group of friends, you know, a group of friends or a certain context where only mother tongue is being spoken and they're fun with it, then they will continue to hone and maintain that language in that social context. Okay, so the extent of attrition really varies based on individual circumstances, degree of continued mother tongue use, and community support and personal motivation. So just a quick sharing for myself. When I was younger, I used to be a student reporter, and I part of this Chinese newspaper reporter group, and we only speak Chinese among ourselves, right? So even when we grow older, up to now, we still communicate in Mandarin, and we still text in Mandarin to each other. So we form a group that we can associate this language with. On the other hand, in my dominant language is English, where I work my career and my other friends, and you know, so that is another context that my English has been dominant in my life. So that's important. So take home message number 2 is that keeping a language strong actually needs plenty of practice. So a lot of exposure and also social interaction. So kids that pass puberty still need friends. They still need the family, and they still need real life conversations to keep it alive. If you indulge me, I'm going to talk a little bit quickly in the next 10 minutes about code mixing, code switching. I think this is a topic that a lot of the parents are very interested in. So if they mixes the two languages, does it mean that it's a sign that my child is confused with the two languages? So this is a very important question. So let me just show you a very quick video clip on in a preschool kindergarten where you can see the ease of children switching the language. Okay, it's in English and Mandarin, but there'll be subtitles. Okay, wait, huh? Okay, so he is actually drawing something with the friend, and then we're thinking of, I think he's drawing some spaceship, and asked, should we draw a button? Oh yeah, maybe you must press the button. So as they draw, they were playing, having this role play. So okay, maybe press the button. Yeah, press button ma, right? So press button, and so you 这边有个 button. So here that's why we need the button, because we need to press the button. So on this side there's a button. Okay, but sometimes there's emergency and you need to press the button. I think he's trying to draw a emergency button. So you can see that in this code switching is quite common. This is called code mixing, and does it mean anything wrong with that? So code switching basically had two main types. One is called intrasentential. So for example, wait, okay, 等一下, wait, I'll give you back. Or 这个 ATM 关了. So this intersentential in within a sentence, you do a switch in the two languages, which we saw in that video. There's also intersentential, which means you've complete a sentence before you switch to another. It's called when you switch to a sentence in another language, like 等一下, wait, 我知道, I know. Table manners, elbows off the table. So these are two types of switching. Okay, so what does it mean? Actually, code switching is a very common phenomenon amongst bilinguals. We switch a lot. Okay, and actually, contrary to ideas that, oh, maybe the children are confused, but actually it's a result of complex bilingual skills. So I just show you here, right? So in this context, he's not confused. He's not confusing, he's not replacing anything. He is trying to say that, okay, in the context, the button is where maybe he knows this, they have this context and learn the button about emergency. So he has this button, but he wanted to also put it in the context where, sometimes you need to be a little bit more flexible. So actually, he can switch pretty well. So when they switch, they're constrained by grammatical properties of the language involved, and is actually regulated by principles and mechanisms of the language use. So for example, when they say 这个 ATM 关了, this is quite common, right? It means this ATM has closed, right? Okay, but hardly you see children coached by saying ATM 这个关了, for example. So they do try to follow the grammatical properties. So therefore, it's quite a common phenomenon. Okay, so it is not a sign of confusion. So it's very common that children use language properly. So they engage different strategies to repair communication breakdown. So when we observe and record daily interactions between children and peers, we found that there's no apparent relationship between the observed vocabulary and the parental report of code switch exposure. In fact, there is a strong correlation, let's say, between observed Chinese, which is the mother tongue, and observed switches in the class. So what this means is that they will only switch because they have the vocabulary and the skills to switch. And I wanted to also take this opportunity to actually distinguish between input and output, which means that when you speak to the children or the child, this is input at here. So of course, as much as you can, you speak in grammatically correct language because they are learning from you. So that's input. But when the children output, which means that when they could switch, it doesn't mean that they're confused. They're still trying learning. They do learn how to pass between the two languages. It's just a stage of development. So before your house, when you build a house, you do renovation. Before your house could be nice and neat, you go through this messy stage whereby you try to sort things. This is my bedroom. This is my clothes. These are the utensils. You have to split them. So this is a process which is very common. And of course, one question is, does code switching hinder vocabulary? So does exposure to code switching hinder the children's vocabulary development? I also want to highlight that this is not language delay. It doesn't mean that code switching and code mixing is a sign of language delay. Language delay is a more overall effect. Overall phenomenon of language difficulties. So any language can have language delay. So if you have language delay, which means that if your child doesn't reach a certain milestone in any particular language, you might want to look for specialists to do further testing. But code switching is not about language delay. Okay, so sometimes people say that, oh, okay, maybe if the more I could switch the two languages, it seems that my children's vocabulary shrinks. But you see, a lot of the times, the vocabulary can only measure in one language. So you may seem that bilingual children seems to possess a smaller vocabulary language, but it is because in the language of the testing compared to monolinguals. So for example, in this study, they found that on the x-axis is actually called the Peabody vocabulary test scores. So how many words that they know. Of course, the higher the better, right? And this is a frequency, that means how many children in that category, right? Percentage. So here is English monolingual. the solid line, and the dotted line is for bilinguals. And it appears that the monolingual have higher vocabulary than the monolingual in this testing. This testing PPVT is in English. So you might worry. But of course, you can see that there is a distribution, which means that they are bilingual children who are actually have higher vocabulary, English vocabulary, than monolingual children. Okay. So, but there's this thing called total conceptual vocabulary. So they are not slower to develop. What does conceptual vocabulary means? So, for example, in the bilingual bilingual child, she may have a list of Chinese words vocabulary, like she knows 狗猫妈妈爸爸巴沙熊熊, for example. But on the other hand, she also have a list of words in English, like dog, cat, mommy, daddy. Okay, but you can see that. Oh, sorry. So you can see that there are these words that in Bahasa that she may not have it in English, but she has it in Chinese. And xiong xiong, let's say, it means a bear. She has it in Chinese, but she may not necessarily have it in English and vice versa. But the total conceptual vocabulary means you count the distinct words, the knowledge that she has of a certain word is actually better. So this is English. This is English monolinguals. This is bilingual English. I think they have the bilingual Spanish, I think. And so they found that the bilingual children tend to have a stronger total vocabulary than the monolinguals, okay, if not better. So therefore, there is this phase of developing and increasing. They might appear slow, but they actually are not slower. Okay, so take home message 3 is that mixing is not really a sign of confusion. In fact, it could be a reflection of complex linguistic skills. So if you find that if your child doesn't, your child learns 2 languages, learns mother tongue, and your child isn't even refuse to mix or switch, maybe the child is not confident enough to use the mother tongue. Therefore, the child may not even want to use it, to even attempt to switch. So bilingual children are not confused when they mix languages, but they do it because they have the skills to switch. Okay. So just to round up the few important tips to share, again, make it fun, make it meaningful. Language is not just for exams. You connect it to play, stories, social interactions, and you try to turn daily routines into language learning moments. So just to share with you my personal experience. So my kids, when they were young, they love Pokemon. So I make sure I, buy the Chinese DVDs of Pokemon, right? And then the Chinese movies, the Chinese DVDs, I only play Chinese subtitles. Even if they don't know how to read, it's okay because it's exposure counts. They cannot rely on reading, especially as they get older, they may tend to read, and reading is a predominant response. If there are words, we cannot help but read. So I only show Chinese movies, Chinese DVDs and Chinese subtitles, totally Chinese. And now, when we talk about Pokemon, they still talk to me in Mandarin because there's this context that they are immersed in. So again, start early, be consistent, and the stronger the exposure, the earlier the exposure, the stronger the foundation. So your child's English will not be weakened as he has to learn mother tongue because English, it will still remain the more dominant language in Singapore. And tip 2, so don't worry too much about your child switching between language as they learn the language is quite natural. And if you're worried about, okay, but my mother tongue is not very good, right? How to do it? Because you also mentioned that, input is also important. That's fine. You can be a role model and you can learn together. So if you are not too sure, you can learn, oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, this is how you speak, this is how you can learn together with your child, and learning alongside with your child builds motivation. So raising a bilingual child takes effort, and consistency is the key. So you can customize your learning journey. Dr. Rauda also mentioned that each individual child is unique. Each individual household is unique. So you need to customize it. Understanding the different challenges and using the right strategies at different stage may make learning smoother and effective. So these are some example of activities. I'm not going to go through in detail, but it just means that at different age group, you might want to engage in different activities that is relevant for the age group. When they're younger, you sing, you play audio background, you do a lot of face-to-face interaction, and then you use repetitive words, describe actions, introduce picture books, and then respond in mother tongue. And another question some people may ask is, well, what if my child speak English back to me. Well, you just need to consistently respond back to a mother tongue, because kids are very smart. So if they know that you know English and it's easier for them to speak English, they will just speak English to you because you understand, right? So if you don't respond in English to them, you only respond in mother tongue, they will know that they will have to speak to you in mother tongue. So they are smart. Kids are very smart. Okay. And of course, as you grow older, it's different. You can use tech or TV as you get older, make it fun, exposed to cultural content. Enrichment class can be interesting because they build that social connection. You can do it together with them as well, with the children. And as they get older, you can have more tips, more social, make it more social, and that will be important. So I just quickly end my sharing with this important message that actually knowing two languages save lives. So this is an excerpt from Lord of the Rings.
It reads, "The doors of Durin, Lord of Moria, speak, friend, and enter."
What do you suppose that means?
Oh, it's quite simple. If you are a friend, you speak the password and the doors will open. Anon Nahel, Edro Hiaben.
Nothing was happening. Friend. And enter. What's the Elvish word for friend?
Belnar.
Right. So that's very important that you know how to speak the two languages. It saves lives. So thank you for listening to my sharing. Thank you. I pass it back. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Queen, for that wonderful sharing. I think it was so insightful. And yes, knowing two languages saves lives. And that's so good to hear that. And I think our parents, the parents who are here as participants, would have really benefited from this sharing of yours, especially that you shared about the sensitive period, which is up to 7 years. I hope parents are aware of this and make use of this early years to let them learn both the languages. And what was very interesting from your sharing was about language maintenance. I think that is also a very important fact that you have highlighted, because language learning is definitely a continuum and it resonates very well with all of us as language educators. And it was very interesting that you said that code switching is not a sign of confusion. So parents out there, it's if your children are code switching, yes, it's of course complex linguistic skills that they have equipped themselves with. So thank you so much, Prof. Quinn, for that wonderful sharing. And now I think it's the most awaited session, which is the Q&A. I think most of you all have a lot of burning questions, but at the same time, we have also received questions from all of you participants prior to the webinar, and we kind of collated, and I think most of the questions were answered via the sessions itself. In fact, I think there were a lot of questions on code switching, and I think Prof. Queen had actually touched on that and gave many tips and also some strategies and how to manage that. And what we did on our side was we had collated this question, and we realized that it comes under two main categories. So what we'll do is we will allow the experts, the two speakers, to handle this two main category questions, and then the remaining questions, if you still have any other questions, you can put it in the Q&A. And I see that there's already some question in the Q&A. We will see if time permits, we'll look at it. Otherwise, the remaining questions we will collate and we will send it to your registered email address. So the two main categories of questions that we have is any advice on how to motivate children to speak their mother tongue language in a predominantly English speaking environment? I think this is a huge challenge for most Singapore parents. And the next one was any advice for parents who are not as proficient in mother tongue language to nurture bilingualism? And also, how about for parents who speak more than one language? Is trilingualism possible? Very interesting questions. And maybe I will leave it to our expert to answer this. So, Dr. Rauda, do you have any suggestion for the first, your thoughts on your first question? Do you have any thoughts on that to share?
Thank you, Tiff. Um, okay, regarding the question on the advice to motivate children, right, in a predominantly English-speaking environment. First, I will always say start with ourselves first. First, you have to ask ourselves, why do we want to motivate the child? What's the purpose? Because that will actually determine the ways that we're going to do it. If we say that, we have to be frank, right? If we say that we want to motivate because of school, because we want them to get good grades and all that, then you will see that the motivation, then the part that the parent is supporting will be in terms of like, providing all this assessment and all that, which will be a short-term thing for the child, right? But if the purpose of wanting the child to be motivated is because that mother tongue is important, then that will determine the efforts in what the parent will put in to instill that love for learning or liking the language. And as as Prof. Quinn has shared earlier, some of the activities, that she has shared for the various ages, as well as to ensure that the child will connect the language with positive experiences, the feeling of happiness, that they enjoy learning. Then that will motivate them to continue learning beyond even the years that we're nurturing them. So I hope that
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I totally agree. I think that positive experience is just so important, not just enrichment classes for a particular language, but just the exposure and learning. I mean, that's how we were. I mean, when we were much younger, I come from a very Tamil speaking home, and we watched Tamil movies and we heard the Tamil radio, and that was all wonderful experiences. And those are my early thoughts about the language. So I totally agree. And Prof. Quinn, do you have any thoughts on that? Do you want to add on or anything like that?
Yes, I agree. For example, if you form, if you enjoy the activities together,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where you actually build the context, and the emotional engagement, and the motivation to continue to engage with the mother tongue.
Thank you so much. And I think the next question we have, I think most of the parents are, I think most Singaporeans are also facing that now, because most Singaporean parents right now are using English at home. So they themselves are not very well versed in the language. So how do you suggest? I know you have already shared many tips and strategies for them, but how would you collate these, and how would you direct these parents on how they can help their children when they themselves are not very fluent in that language?
Okay, so I think there are a few things that we can think about. So
Mm-hmm.
we mentioned we can actually engage the learning experience together with the children. So they watch this saying, you can sing and watch with them. And so as long as what Dr. Ron mentioned, if you have a positive attitude, right, that actually helps you to maintain, because children are quite sensitive. So if they know that you are not very good in mother tongue and you are hesitant in using it, they will also not want to use it. So they're quite smart about it. So as long as you show that let's do it together, right? They will actually be much more engaged with the mother tongue learning process.
So basically, it bogs down to the attitude, I guess. So, and I know parents have to be such role models because children are looking at us and they emulate whatever that we do. So, yes, totally agree on that. So, our panelists, do you have anything else to share on these two areas? Otherwise, we will look at the Q&A. Miss Bud, yeah. Okay. So, we will look at the Q&A. I think there's one in. Um, Prof. Queen and Dr. Rauda, if there's anything you would like to answer live, would be nice. I'm sure you can see are you able to see the Q&A questions?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. If there's anything that you would like to answer.
I can take the first question. There's one question about if the parents don't speak a certain language and keen to for the children for the child to learn that language.
Mm,
So okay, so I guess if the parents don't speak a certain language, there are a couple of ways you can think about it. You're keen for the child to learn the language. First thing is you can learn the language together with the child. Right, that's immediate because you don't speak, you can learn it from scratch with the child, and sometimes you can even learn from the child, and that's one from the parents' attitude perspective. The other one, of course, as I mentioned, the context is very important. Your child needs to want to use the language, right? So if there's no context to use, if you just learn the language from a textbook or learn the language from a class, you're never able to carry it far because the child doesn't see the value of the language. So
mm,
you probably have to find out situations, context, social, and places where the child can immerse in. The immersion into the language environment is important. So let's say if I don't speak Tamil and I want
mm,
my kids to learn Tamil, then I try to learn. It's hard, but I try to learn so the child can sense my positivity. At the same time, I will get the child to make Tamil friends who can speak Tamil, right?
mm,
Maybe can watch Tamil movies together.
mm,
When there are Tamil workshops or storytelling, I'll bring the child and immerse. And if there's any celebratory events, right, where people are engaged, especially culture, because language, you cannot isolate language with culture, right?
mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of
Definitely.
culture activities involved, in Tamil, for example. Then I
Mm.
will ensure that I bring the child to those events and get immersed in it. So these are some potential tips on it.
So giving them that authentic experience and exposure, I think that's really, really important. I mean, that's how we had, that kind of authentic cultural exposure. And then we didn't even realize that we were actually learning the language from that.
Mm.
So, but that's not the case now. But so parents have to make this concerted effort. So it can be quite challenging actually because they really need to make that effort. So parents out there, it's a bit of a work, but I'm sure it's a good investment of your time, I guess.
And
Yeah.
remember to if you're possible, to get your child to make friends.
Mm.
Once they have friends who can speak the other languages and they can communicate, I think that is a very important motivation.
I think the social context is so important. They learn from their peers and they do exactly what the peers are doing. Thank you so much for that. Anything else? There was one more interesting one on. Mm, would you like to take any of it? Anything else?
Yeah, I think I read this question about one parent, one language that I mentioned earlier. And the question is that what if the mother who spends more time is not fluent in that mother tongue?
Mm,
So is it, should we then switch roles because then, or just encourage the mother to speak mother tongue as best as she could? Because if the mother, it depends on, I would say, this is a decision that the family has to make because I'm not sure what is the fluency level of the mother. If the mother can still, speak in the mother tongue and then keep on like maybe do activities together, as Prof. Queen suggests, like watch a movie together. So it's still associated with the mother where there's a lot of time spent at home in mother tongue. We can still stick to that process because then as it grows, the mother can also learn that mother tongue as because the time given for mother tongue outside the home is rather limited because we have
mm.
a lot of exposure in English. Yeah, so it is eventually up to the family to decide on that based on the fluency of the parents.
Actually, I totally agree with you as an educator. The only time that they have is the mother tongue period sometimes at class. And the minute they step out of the mother tongue lesson, they are bombarded by English. Even ourselves, at office, the only time that we speak will be during the Tamil lesson or the Chinese lesson or the English lesson. The minute even the educator comes out of the sphere of the room, you end up speaking in English. So I think it is parents who need to consciously make this effort to create this exposure. And that is where we at LKYFB, we also we organize events and all we support with resources to help with this bilingual education. So I think it's 11:30 now. I think there are more questions out there, but most of it I think has been covered nicely by our speakers. Uh, I think we will wrap up here. Is that okay, PD? We'll wrap up here. Okay, can. So we'll go back here and yes, so most of the questions were answered, I would guess, and whatever that is still not answered, we will try and collate and we will respond to all our participants via their registered email. And our recorded version of this webinar will also be uploaded in the YouTube channel, right? So at this juncture, I think I would like to extend our thank you note mainly to the participants who have joined us today. And without the participant, this would not have been possible. And very actively, they have asked very good questions. So thank you for that. And of course, to our esteemed speakers who have taken their time and effort to give us such wonderful knowledge and insightful their thoughts on many bilingual aspects and also on the developmental process for young children. So thank you so much, Dr. Rauda and Prof. Queen. We are so appreciative of your time and effort. Okay, just as always, we need your feedback. I think this will help us shape our future sessions. So all you need to do is to scan this QR code, or you can go to that link. So if you can scan the QR code, you will be able to see the feedback form. Maybe I'll give you a few seconds, maybe 30 seconds or a minute to fill up your feedback form, because this is really important to us. Thank you so much. I hope you have scanned it. Please don't leave yet because we have a bit more details. If you have missed it or if you have not scanned it, we can email it to you, not to worry. And you can continue your bilingual journey with us via our social media handles. We are on Facebook, we are on Instagram. And if you want to be the first to know all about our programs, please join us on this social media handles to get exclusive bilingual resources and also to join the vibrant bilingual community. We hope to see you all on Instagram and Facebook. Show us some love and support so that we can continue with our programs and initiatives. With that, we will conclude this webinar. Thank you once again to everyone who has joined us. We hope you have a wonderful day ahead. And to all the women out there, happy Women's Day. Thank you. And we'll see you all next time on a different event. Thank you.